You are listening to The Fortress. Welcome back to The Fortress, guys. Just for everybody's information, I'm going to be changing the way I'm doing things a little bit. I will still have an edition of The Fortress every time with video, strictly meant for video, for my interviews, so you can see who I'm interviewing most of the time. But I'll also have still the audio edition, which is strictly for the radio. So that'll be, that way I can focus more on quality of sound, that kind of thing. So anyway, that's just a little update. As far as today's show, I don't have a guest today, and I did that because of what my last guest, Jeremy, mentioned, and that was the power of storytelling. And I was just going to take a few moments to tell some stories to you, and just maybe get you to start thinking a little bit. The first thing I wanted to talk about was why I am so drawn to storytelling. And I think what I mainly wanted to talk about was actually what I actually read over the air on the radio edition is an old blog post of mine where I got to write about storytelling. And specifically, I wrote about the perfect story. Now, in my opinion, and this is just my 2 cents, but I think that every author who's passionate about their work is constantly trying to write the perfect story. Yet they continually fall short. I also think that only one perfect story has ever existed, and that is the Bible. Through whatever means you believe, I think that through divine intervention, divine inspiration, that mankind was able to put together all of these books that are actually God's Word. And it put together, it culminates to one perfect story. And then, of course, the sequel to God's Word written down is actual history, His story. So I don't think we'll ever be able to write the perfect story. But now here's a little parallel for you. Think about it this way. Writers are trying to write the perfect story and yet continuously fall short. And yet there's one great author continuously writing a story as we go. Actually, he's already written it. And that's history, and we are all characters in the story. And there's so many plot lines that interweave and mix and cross, and people's paths cross and sometimes never connect, and and it's all based on choices we make. But we are told to continuously try to live like Christ did and be like Christ, and yet we as people continuously fall short. And that's why we need Jesus. It makes so much sense. Now, if you think about it, no man could have come up with that because there's no other story like it. There are other stories that try to imitate it, but there's no other story. Look at all the other religions out there. There's no other story just like it. And that's, I think, because it's mankind's imitations of it. Desperate attempts to try to make, come up with a whole new religion. I mean, if I were one guy, and perhaps I didn't think these other people who were divinely inspired were right, and I wanted to give my whole point of view, kind of like I'm doing in this little show, and then form a whole religion from it. Whoa. Think that's ever happened? Why, sure it has. Sometime close to 700 BC. Anyway, so I wanted to start out the show by talking about that perfect story and just kind of saying that, you know, we are all falling short for a reason. It's so that we can cling to God. It's because He wants to love us just like I love my son. He wants us to depend on Him like I want my son to depend on me. But at the same time, He wants us to learn from mistakes. There's some suffering along the way. He doesn't do those mistakes to us, but He knows that it's part of the way we go. He knows that it's part of the story. And what happens when we face suffering and face different things that challenge us, and then we get through it? What happens? We're stronger because of it. We're stronger characters because of it. Authors who write stories can tell you the same thing happens to their characters in their stories. The same thing happens to my characters in the books that I write. Now, do you think this is all just coincidence? I don't think it's all coincidence. It's all intentionally designed. It all happens to work out this way because it was designed to do so. That's how I wanted to start the show. Now these my video editions that are strictly just for YouTube are not going to be quite as long as some of the audio because I don't like to read as much on video. I can read on audio and you can't tell I'm reading sometimes, unless I actually tell you I'm reading. So that's our first segment. Ponder on that. Ponder on the perfect story. I dare you to try to write your own perfect story. You'll see that you fall short. That's just my 2 cents. We'll be back after this break.
Shut up and sit down.
An Egyptian holy man for the religion of Islam is assassinated, and the killer leaves a gold cross as his calling card. The same Christian assassin kills on U.S. soil, and it is now up to the FBI and Interpol to bring him to justice. FBI agents John Knox and Beth White team up with Interpol Inspector Malik Sharif, but they are at a loss when the assassin leaves no trace of evidence at crime scenes. Meanwhile, the assassin is starting his own personal war with Muslims, and the government he works for becomes suspicious. Can a Christian FBI agent and a Muslim Interpol officer put aside their differences and perhaps even use them to track down the assassin? Can Agent White battle her spiritual demons? Can the agents find the killer before the media turns the case into an international religious circus? Join the investigators on a journey that will remind you of the latest assassin-style video game and your latest crime novel. But before it's all over, ask yourself, is the assassin any different than you or me? Or is he just misguided?
Good to have you back, everybody. Now, I wanted to ask something to you guys out there. Ask yourself this. Have you ever had a time where somebody did something so despicable to you and you just wanted to get even? You wanted revenge. You wished God would just come down and just smite them. In my first book, I try to get readers to feel that, because my main character of the first story, he inspires the title of the story, and the title is Misguided. It earns that title pretty well, I think. But in the story, my main character, he is a counter-terror expert, former Navy SEAL, works for the CIA, secret agent type guy, and his family gets kidnapped and killed. And so he carries out this personal vendetta, and the book follows him throughout this process. And But at the same time, you kind of feel for the guy. You can't help but feel for the guy. You kind of want him to succeed before the book is done. I'm not going to tell you whether he does or not, but I do encourage you to read it. But have you ever felt that? Have you ever felt that way? There's an old quote from the Bible: "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord." He wasn't kidding when he said that. It's not up to us to get revenge. Although human nature, our sinful nature, makes us want to. Trust me, I have been there. But it's not up to us. And so my first novel, Misguided, talks about this, and it helps you see a guy go through this journey, go through this story, and yet, you know, he actually starts to understand after a while, maybe this isn't the right thing. But by the time he figures it out, well, I'll leave that up to you to read the book. But you know, it's a hard thing to really think about until something bad happens to you because of somebody else's actions. So I encourage you to pick up the Bible yourself, to pick up the perfect story. Read several of the stories in the Bible. You're going to come across example after example after example of when people try to take matters in their own hands and get revenge for something done to them, things don't always go their way. Now, think about this as it relates to current events. I mean, you could go anywhere with this. You could look at the election. You could look at ISIS and the way things are going in Europe. You could look at terrorist attacks that have happened here. You can go anywhere. Now, how many people do you think wish so bad they could exact vengeance on the perpetrators of such injustice and violence and death? So, how do we solve this? How do we solve this problem? Well, not only is the Bible the perfect story, but it's also the perfect how-to guide. Because the answer is pretty easy. Unfortunately, not enough of us remember the answer. And that is to turn to God. A lot of people don't want to do that anymore. Because I can solve it. I know I can solve it. I can fix this. He can fix it. Donald Trump can fix it. Now, look, I voted for Donald Trump, but do I think he can fix all of our problems? No. There's only one person who can do that. And when I say person, I mean figuratively, because he's a lot bigger than a person. God is the only one that's going to fix it all. He even tells us how he's going to do it. But you have to read it for yourself. Now, I have stories. As Jeremy said last week, Jesus taught through stories. And I don't want to so much teach through my stories as tell them as they are modern parables, and they have lessons that you can learn through the characters in the stories. That's what I write for. That's mainly what I want to accomplish with Fortress Books. and I encourage you, if you're not going to read my books, that's great, that's fine, but I encourage you to at least, if you don't think I know what I'm talking about, investigate for yourself. Pick up the Bible, start reading it, try to make sure you understand what you're reading. There are tons of people out there, there are tons of how-to guides. Okay, yes, those are probably written by people, but things that you can use to help you understand what you're reading when you read the Bible. Is all the reading exciting? I'm here to tell you firsthand, no. Not all of it. And unfortunately, the worst parts are close to the beginning, and so if you can just get through that, then you can keep going and things kind of roll on. But Deuteronomy, some of that, Leviticus and Numbers, okay, those are the harder ones. But other than that, a lot of the genealogies and stuff, if you can just kind of breeze through that, get to the meat, get to the stories. There are so many stories within the Bible. And what's great is those are historical stories. A lot of them, and we can learn from history. I mean, the good Lord knows the U.S. could learn from some history right about now. But that's what I wanted to say in this segment. Like I said, this whole show itself is not going to be as long as the radio show, maybe a little shorter. But take that for what it's worth. Think about vengeance. The next time you're really ticked off at somebody, I'm going to get them. Try not to take that path. You can learn through a lot of examples that doesn't always pan out well for you. God will make sure that the people who do injustice to you, the people who commit unjust things and evil acts, they will have their comeuppance. I read that in, I think, a sports article or something today. The word comeuppance. They'll get theirs. When we come back, we're going to take it a little different direction. But I'll tell you about another story. I did write the third segment story that we'll talk about as well. So we'll talk about my book Misled when we come back, and we'll talk about a specific character, a particular character. He's one of my favorites. I have kind of a special connection to him, and you'll find more about that when we come back.
Russian mobsters are dying in a federal prison, and at first it looks like it may be a case of racism and hate. But agents John Knox and Malik Sharif realize they are dealing with one elusive killer, and things are turning out to be much more than they seem. Between Malik's encounter with his dad for the first time in years, and John Knox's discoveries involving the possibility of capturing the same man who killed his former partner, the agents have more than they bargained for. Why is the killer targeting Russian mobsters? Will Malik find the spiritual awakening which it seems Knox and Malik's dad have experienced? Is there something more sinister and far deeper behind the death in the prison? Follow the two agents and meet several new characters in this second installment in the Knox Mission series as they discover murder, racism, hate, conspiracy, and even hope through it all. But just when everyone seems to think they have it all figured out, you'll see they are all mistaken.
Welcome back to the last segment. As I told you before our break, when we got back, we talk about one of my favorite characters in my favorite book I've written so far. I've written 5 novels. The third one is called Misled. And Misled has a lot to do with the current political climate in America. And maybe 6 months ago is really when it was hitting heavy as far as a certain vibe against anti-law enforcement behavior and a lot of rhetoric being put out there by the media, stuff like that, a lot of division. So I used that to inspire the book I wrote. And in the book, there's a certain witness to several crimes, but one main crime in particular committed by an assassin named the Klansman. Now, this witness happens to be a 10-year-old boy. Now, those of you out there who may be new to my program, new to me, you may not know, but I was at one time an elementary PE teacher. I did that for 8 years. I love kids. I still love kids. But as I've gotten older, my tolerance for some of the energy, some of the energetic things they do, it got a little lower. We'll leave it at that. But I do like kids, and Tyree basically reminds me a lot of the kids that I used to teach. But Tyree is especially afraid of this Klansman because he has seen him. The Klansman doesn't know necessarily that he has been witnessed. Not saying he won't know. You got to read that book to find out too. But my favorite character of all my writing so far, it's a character that I kind of base after, well, a good friend of mine who's from Alabama. I can just kind of imagine my character John Knox having his accent, but then he's like the ultimate version of the law enforcement version of me. He's an FBI agent, and so John is going to spend some time with the witness, and the little boy's mom kind of has the kid excited that John's coming to see him. But the boy starts up a conversation asking John about nightmares, and tells him that he's been having nightmares, and he keeps seeing the scary image of the Klansman, of this guy with a white hood over his face. And so John Knox actually, you have to kind of read the book to find out, but Knox actually has a connection that helps him kind of have that same understanding for being afraid of these people with white hoods. And John Knox is a white guy. But what he does is he uses Psalm 23, and it kind of helps quell some of the boy's fears. He points to that, and I just love the imagery and the words in the verses. So I am going to read this on the video. So just listen to the words of Psalm 23. If you've never heard them before, this might be a treat. If you have heard them, well, I mean, you can follow along or just recite it out loud. I sometimes have it memorized, sometimes I don't. I have a Swiss cheese memory, so but I'm going to read it so I don't get anything wrong. But he tells Tyree, first of all, he gives him some context. He tells him that it was written by a shepherd, by David, who was once a shepherd. And he talks about how David would face things that he was afraid of. And so he tells him that if he reads this over and over, it can help him find comfort. And then he also relates it to Jesus. So just hear these words first. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. In some translations it's I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, or the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I don't know about you guys, but when I've been afraid, when I was afraid when I was younger, when I've been afraid I might not be able to do something that my family's counting on, that maybe I don't get this job that I really want or whatever. I mean, I'm not looking for a new job, but thing, as a kind of an example, if I was afraid, it would help me if somebody would comfort me. And this right here gives you an example that you can just go to God with your fears to find comfort. David was giving this as an example of what to do. Turn to God because He is our shepherd. And so in my book, Knox is telling Tyree, go to God because He is your shepherd and He can comfort you. Now, you can take that a little step further. When you are truly afraid, does it really matter that you're afraid? Does it really matter what happens if you have really given your heart to God and if you accept Jesus Christ for who He is? Then these little things here on earth that we're afraid of, does it really matter? Now that's hard to think about. I mean, as a law enforcement officer, you know, if I've had to fight a gangbanger, or, you know, if we've had to wrestle a person who's mentally unstable and they're out of control and they're wanting to just hurt themselves and anybody else around them, if you're afraid, it's kind of hard to say, well, it doesn't matter. But in the great big scheme of things, especially as it relates to the world and the fate of the world and the permanent home of our souls, doesn't matter. Because that's why Jesus came, so that it won't matter. All of the stuff that we have here is finite. But Jesus is infinite. So we really have no reason to fear because Jesus has already conquered evil. When He died on the cross for us, He conquered evil. Evil doesn't have a leg to stand on. It just thinks it does while the earth is still going around right now, as it is. But God tells us that there will be a new heaven and a new earth. See, like I said, He's already written it. The coolest part of the story, of God's perfect story, the Bible, and then continued, is that God has told us the ending. And we as characters in that story get to pick which ending we want. How cool is that? So it's not just a choose your own adventure book along the way. You know, I know some of you guys probably read some of those as kids. Like I remember when I would go to the book fair, those were the first books I looked for, the choose your own adventure books. And then you could see if you could pick the best story to get through the book. But we already know the ending. We know it can end one of two ways for everybody. If you get through the Bible, you'll pretty much realize that. And you get to choose. Which way do you want it to end for you? I think that's kind of cool. So that's it for this segment. When I come back, we'll just have some closing words. I will tell you what to expect. I already have my next guest lined up. It took me a couple days to arrange it because, well, I had to figure out exactly who I wanted to pick out of my list of several people to pick from right now. So when we come back, I'll let you know what's coming up in the next show. But first, here's a few fun words.
Crikey, did you see the size of that croc? Oh, never mind. I don't even care about crocodiles anymore. What I came to talk to you about was this new author. Have you heard of him? Jason E. Fort. That's his name. And if you go to his website, www.jason-e-fort.com, you might see the titles of his novels right there. And you can read his novels, and you can hear about all the kind of things, well, you can read about all the kind of things you've been hearing about on the radio. There's Misguided, that's his first novel. Second novel's called Mistaken. Third novel's called Misled. The fourth novel goes in a different direction, and it's called Tracking Game. That's kind of what I do every day. And then the fifth novel is called Dead Memories. Now, Dead Memories is his latest novel, and I think it's a great read. I've read all his novels, by the way. Yeah, when you're not chasing crocodiles, sometimes you got time to read. Anyway, what I was trying to say is go to his website. You can check out his novels. You can check out what he's up to, all the events, book signings, all that kind of mess. You can even read his blog posts. And you can hear a lot about that, on his Friday shows right here on KDOV. Anyway, that's all from Steve-O. But anyway, you guys have a good day.
Welcome back one last time. Before we go, I did want to give you guys a little heads up on what's coming up next week. I'll start with my normal monologue, and we will talk about a little bright spot, and that is just how bright the light of Jesus Christ can be in your life. I will follow that up with a guest, and that guest he's one of the most positive people I've ever met, and that's probably how he inspired me to choose him as a character in my second book. So Jerry Clybourne, the warden, is going to be here. Jerry is a good friend of mine. I've known him since my stint in law enforcement with the big hospital system where I work. Jerry is now a retired, and I'm sure he will probably brag about that a little bit, just to dig it in a little. But he's now a retired captain of security. He was captain of all the security officers in the health system where we work. But he's had a variety of experiences he can tell you about. And so we're going to pull from him, and we're going to pull from his wisdom. And so that's what you can expect next week. Tune in, and we'll probably put it out there at the same time my radio broadcast goes out. And that's Friday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. And you guys have a good night. God bless.